right, good evening. Thank you for being here this evening with us as we plan to present to you the current scenario for the district-wide feeder patterns and boundaries. I want to take care of just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. There are two exits, one that many of you came in, and then there's one on this side as well. We'll take you to the nearest restrooms, which are in that direction on the other side of the cafeteria. So if you need to use the facilities, that's where you can find the restrooms. We have with us this evening sign language interpreters here to my right. And if you are in need of sign language interpretation, we have some reserved seats down on the front to my right. Please help yourself to these seats so you can sit in closer proximity to the translators. We also have with us this evening English-Spanish translators, and I'm going to take just a brief moment to let her introduce herself and welcome in Spanish.
Good evening. Now an announcement in Spanish. Si necesitan interpretación simultánea de español, estamos aquí para servirlos. Tenemos el equipo de interpretación y se los podemos distribuir. Por favor, nos dejan saber si lo necesitan. Gracias. Levanten la mano.
Thank you. All right, as I mentioned this evening, we're here to present to you the current scenario that we shared with the board in November of the district-wide feeder patterns and boundary proposal for your input. We recognize as a district and as employees in the district, parents in the district, and community members that this is challenging. This is a very challenging topic. And this room is filled with emotions, as you can see by the colors represented in the audience. It is my point to that is that we are the 7th largest school district in the state of Texas. And while we are individual schools in different areas, in different neighborhoods, in different communities, our biggest commitment to the future of our county, and our state, and our district is to come together, to share ideas, to provide feedback, and to involve yourself in this engagement process with the district for the first time ever in Fort Bend ISD to be able to comprehensive plan looking at our feeder patterns and boundaries. It is not to isolate communities. It is not to provide this community. So please come with that frame as we have discussions today, because we recognize that it is a challenge. And we're all very passionate as community members, and certainly when it comes to our children. And we can appreciate that from the district side as well. We ask that you please appreciate the challenge in this planning that we are facing, because we are here to engage with you, to get your feedback, to review the data, to review the feedback, and to continue in the planning process so that we're able to make sound recommendations to the Board of Trustees in the January 2015 board meeting that will carry us through the near future, and plans that we can rely upon to educate all of our students. So, colors aside, neighborhoods aside, please come and participate in this process. The very best way for you to do that is to listen to Scott Leopold present the current scenario to you during our time together in the auditorium. He's with DeJohn Richter, and he's been working with us through the facilities planning process and through this planning process. After our October meeting, we received over 6,000 online survey responses from community members, in addition to chat with Charles and email comments, phone calls, meetings, and the like. And that's a lot of interaction and a lot of engagement and a lot to review and consider. We ask you to please respond to the survey online and to the survey we provide you tonight, because that's really the most productive way to provide your input moving forward, because we're able to quantify that information in one venue. And while your responses will be, or your inquiries will be reviewed, and you will receive responses moving forward for the planning process, if you would please keep that in mind. It is the most productive way to engage. As I said a little while ago, it is a challenge. We are planning in public, and so we are planning out loud, planning in public, making things available for your review, and I know that breeds questions. We all do, and so we appreciate the engagement and the time you're taking to review. We plan on providing the presentation and online survey following Wednesday night's meeting. There will be a meeting just like this at Elkins High School from 7 to 9. And following that meeting, by end of business on Friday, we will have the presentation posted to the website, and we'll have the online survey posted through December the 18th. We plan on sharing the implementation plan to accompany this with the Board of Trustees on December the 15th. And I know we're receiving many questions about what does this mean for my child if they're in the middle of their high school career at one school and there's a plan for a change. What about my middle schooler? And that will be part of our planning with the implementation plan. One of the goals being that we cause the least disruption to the students that are at middle school and high school level if there is a transition. Again, that online presentation will be available through the 18th. We plan to take final recommendations to the board on January the 26th. So that's kind of the timeline to keep in mind as Scott shares this information with you. Again, I truly appreciate and speak on behalf of the district how much we appreciate your engagement and recognize that this is a challenging, emotional, passionate time for all of us. So thank you very much for being here.
Okay, it's great to be back here again. I just got back from a 7-day vacation with my parents, and it's great to be here because this is less stressful. Okay. I've noticed in all the meetings that we've had that you guys like your cell phones and you guys like to take pictures of everything. And so all the surveys and everything that we're going to be working on tonight, we're going to have QR codes. And so as we're going through this, if you guys don't have QR readers on your phones, if you could take a minute to download a QR reader. We're also going to have paper copies of the surveys for backups. But I just think it's more convenient for everybody if we use those QR codes. Again, I just want to reiterate what Beth went through. We get a lot of feedback. We get emails, we get chat with Charles, we look at it, we process it, but it's really not quantifiable. So it's important that when you guys are sharing your feedback, that you're using the questionnaires that we provide for you so that it all comes into one place and it's easy to report and quantify. Just kind of an update on the process. Back in I guess it was November, we had scenario A, which we presented to the public for feedback. We took that feedback, we incorporated some of these changes, and we have scenario B. We presented that to the board a few weeks ago. And so what we're here today to do is to collect your feedback on scenario B. We're not collecting any more feedback on scenario A, so everything, all the QR codes are going to refer only to scenario B. But if you have, if you didn't get a chance to submit your feedback on scenario A, please just use the comment section in scenario B to just say, this is why we like A, etc. We've also had a chance to get into more detail with some focus groups on the actual boundary changes. We're also going to go over that today. And so after I get through my presentation, hopefully in about a half an hour, we're going to move out into the cafeteria and we're going to have 2 different sets of QR codes. One of them is going to be for feeders, and that's going to point you to a survey that's going to ask you, okay, which feeder pattern are you talking about? And you pick from one of the 11. And then you show your support, strongly oppose, and then comment. And the other one is on a projector screen up there, and that's going to be for the boundaries. And there's 5 different boundary scenarios, and it's the same deal. There's a QR code. You go in, you scan it, you take the survey. There's 5 different scenarios that I'll go through here. And then that's it. As I go through this, I'd like you guys to just kind of respect me. Let me get through it. Please don't interrupt me while I'm going through it. We'll have plenty of opportunity to talk out in the cafeteria. I'm not going anywhere tonight. So if you guys want to sit here and talk until the cows come home, this is Texas, that's fine. I want to just kind of an update here. Currently, we have 34. This is the current boundaries. We have 34 splits from elementary to middle school and 16 from middle school to high school. In our original scenario A, we had 6 elementary to middle school splits and 4 middle school to high school splits. In our alternate, which was the Clements and Elkins alternate that we've incorporated into scenario B, we had 6 elementary to middle and 5 middle to high. So in scenario B, we have 8 elementary to middle and 6 middle to high. And so we don't have as few splits as we did in scenario A, but we have a heck of a lot less than we do currently. Travis, I'm going to go through each of these feeders kind of one by one. We're going to kind of go from the west to the east. Currently, we have this section of Travis up here to the, kind of on the western part of the district that's pulling students from Holly, Arizona Fleming down into Travis. And this is that area that we really have Travis splitting 4 different middle schools feeding into Travis. And so we had our scenario A. We took this, I'm going to call it the Travis fist up here. We've taken a lot of this area up here in Holly back to Bush, and that gives all of the Holly students continuity through Hodges Bend into Bush High School. Holly is one of the schools that's currently splitting, I think, 6 different ways, and so that's just a prime example of how we've been able to clean up these feeder patterns. In scenario B, what we've done, based on feedback, this is kind of all interrelated. Once we get to kind of the Clemens conversation, this has to do with the Telfair area. We've taken all of Aliana and Old Orchard down here. Old Orchard and Aliana south of Airport would feed into Garcia, and then they would all go to Travis. Now, I've seen there's been emails flying around about this. The purpose of this was to have that continuity. We want to have all of those students at Elementary 46 stay together. They would split. North of Airport would go to Bowie and Travis. South of Airport would go to Garcia and Travis. Now, if this is something that you don't like, that's fine. That's why we're here. We're here to share feedback, but let's just share that feedback in written form so that we can take this back, take your feedback to the board, and look at alternate scenarios. But just know that if we have a scenario where we take Old Orchard or other parts of this area, we would be creating another split. And if that's something that's okay, then tell us. Austin, so what we've done here, this is kind of the other piece of that Travis split, is we've taken all of Cornerstone, which currently feeds into Kempner, and we've taken them into Austin. And to make room for that growth, that's part of that movement of South Aliana and Old Orchard into Travis. And so, again, I just want to reiterate, if that's something that you're not comfortable with, tell us. That's why we're here. The other little piece in here is we've taken Telfair Exchange lofts, which are currently, I don't think there's any students coming out of there yet, but they're currently zoned to Colony Meadows, Satartia, and then Kempner. We've taken them into Walker Station, Satartia, and Austin. And so it's a detached attendance area for Walker Station, but they all then go to Satartia, and they all go to Austin. Bush is actually unchanged from scenario A, and I'll just kind of review this. Currently, Bush, I think, is fed by 3 different middle schools. Pieces of Crockett, pieces of Hodges Bend, piece of Garcia. We've taken this down to 2. All the Crockett students, 100%, would feed into Bush, and Hodges Bend would split between Bush and Kempner, but it's a whole school split. And so we'd have all of Holly, Mission Bend, and Mission Glen feeding into Hodges Bend, and then into Bush. The other 19% of this are the Arizona Fleming students who would feed into Hodges Bend and then into Kempner. The only real change here, and we'll talk about this in the boundary change, is we had originally proposed this section that is south of Barbara Jordan, I think it's Mission Sierra, going to possibly Elementary 49 when it opens. But in order to ease overcrowding, we've just left them at Barbara Jordan until future relief schools come online within the Bush feeder pattern. And so that's something, rather than move these students into Elementary 46 with the possibility of them being overcrowded and have to move again later, we would just leave them at Barbara Jordan. Kempner. Kempner is actually also unchanged. This is we have all of Sugar Land Middle School feeding into Kempner. We still have our Barrington Place split between Dulles and Kempner, and we have our Hodges Bend split with Arizona Fleming, all of the Arizona Fleming students feeding into Kempner. And what this does is we've taken Cornerstone out of Kempner, reducing utilization at Kempner, and by moving Arizona Fleming, we've kind of increased that to get a better utilization at Kempner. and also moving students from Barrington Place into Dulles to better utilize Dulles. Dulles is also unchanged from scenario A. As you can see, we've added this about 66% of Barrington Place, all of Meadows into the Dulles feeder. And so all the students that go to Dulles High School will come from Dulles Middle School. It's a perfect feeder, as you can see here. Clements, this is kind of where things changed a little bit. Currently, 59 is the kind of northwest boundary on Clements. And so you can see we've got Cornerstone and the Lakeview Triangle feeding into Kempner. In scenario A, we took Cornerstone into Clements, and we took Lakes of Austin Parkway, and I think it's Lakefield, out of Clements into Elkins. The alternate is exactly the same with as far as the high school boundaries go, but we had some shifting with the middle schools. Scenario A had all of Fort Settlement feeding exclusively into Clements. Scenario A alternate, and now scenario B maintains that split at Fort Settlement and also First Colony. And so you can see we've got Colony Meadows feeding 100% into Fort Settlement and then into Clements. Commonwealth feeding 100% into Fort Settlement and then into Clements. One other little change that we made to kind of take some of the utilization off of Elementary 47 is we've moved the Avalons at Telfair, Avalons at Riverstone, too many Avalons, we didn't move them, we just left them in Commonwealth, which better utilizes Commonwealth. And so they would feed into Commonwealth, Fort Settlement, and then into Clements. Elkins. So a lot of the feedback that we got from Elkins was from Creekstone Village, and I think it's Brookside here. And as we were drawing this boundary with these focus groups, there's just so much projected growth in here right around Elementary 47. We just could not get beyond the current Commonwealth boundary. And so all of the students that we have drawn in this Elementary 47 boundary, which I'm going to go into more detail here in a couple minutes, these are 100% current Commonwealth students. There aren't any students that aren't currently zoned to Settlers Way or Austin Parkway that would be moved into 47. It is completely Commonwealth. And per our policy, we're looking at aligning those feeder patterns. And we have a split at Settlers Way with Creekstone Village and Brookside currently feeding into Fort Settlement. In order to get Settlers Way feeding 100% into First Colony, we moved Creekstone Village and Brookside out of Fort Settlement and into First Colony. Now, if they stay at Fort Settlement, what that means is we would have the utilization at Fort Settlement at or near 100%, and the utilization at First Colony, 75, 80%. And so it's that balance of, do we want to maintain what we have now, or do we want to really balance our utilization? And one other thing to consider is that this change at Creekstone Village wouldn't necessarily be feasible until Middle School 15 comes online, which isn't scheduled to open until 2017. And so really the first student in Creekstone Village that may go to First Colony would be a current third grader. And that is if 15 opens as scheduled. Because there's no room at First Colony until the shift students that are currently there come out. And so that's something to remember, that this is a long-term plan, and that we're currently working on our implementation plan that we're going to present to the board later this month. Just remember that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to have to be phased over time. And that's just one thing that I wanted to stress, is that move at the middle school level for Creekstone Village and for Brookside is dependent on opening Middle School 15. The other change here that we've made at Elkins, based on feedback, was that we had initially zoned all of Palmer, which is currently, all of Palmer is feeding into Elkins. We had moved all of Palmer into Hightower to better utilize Hightower. And based on some of the feedback we got from the community, which was that, well, Lake Olympia, the subdivision is much closer to Elkins than it is Hightower. So in scenario B, we have split Palmer at the high school level. And so this is, again, this is planning in public. This is being responsive to feedback. And that's what we looked at. And so that's what's in scenario B. We've added another middle school split, but we've kind of looked at that portion of the policy that talks about closest school. And so if you have that same kind of feeling, Old Orchard, tell us. I know. Let me continue. Marshall is unchanged. We didn't change anything up here. We currently have just some low percentage splits up here. And we have pieces of McAuliffe and pieces of Quail Valley feeding into Marshall. We've cleaned this up so that all of, we've got Armstrong, Glover, Jones, and Hunters Glen all feeding 100% into Missouri City and then into Marshall. And so that's unchanged from scenario A to scenario B. Willow Ridge, same deal. Currently there's a piece of Missouri City feeding into Willow Ridge. We've aligned that so that it's a perfect feeder. Briargate, Ridgegate, Blue Ridge, and Ridgemont feeding 100% into McAuliffe and then into Willow Ridge. Hightower, we talked about this a little bit with the Elkins feeder. Currently, this shows the Palmer boundary, which is currently zoned into Elkins. Scenario A, we had all of Palmer into Lake Olympia and then into Hightower. Scenario B, we've split Palmer, so all of the Palmer students would go to Lake Olympia, and then the Lake Olympia subdivision students would go to Elkins, and then the Vicksburg area students would go to Hightower. Okay, Ridge Point. This kind of better illustrates what I like to call the first colony whale tail. You can see these students here right around Schiff are coming all the way up to, it's not on the screen, but they're coming all the way up to first colony up here. So that's a long way for them. Once middle school 15 comes online in Siena South, all of those Schiff students would then shift into Baines, and we would have Scanlon Oaks, Heritage Rose, and what will be Elementary 48 feeding into middle school 15. One change that we made here in scenario A, we had about 90% of Heritage Rose feeding into middle school 15, about 10% feeding into Baines. We took all these students that are currently east of 521, the Goodman and Burton students, into Heritage Rose and then into 15. What we did to better balance enrollment is we've left those students at Baines, and so we would have all of Schiff, all of Siena Crossing, and about 50% of Heritage Rose feeding into Baines. We'd have the other 50% of Heritage Rose, all of Elementary 48, and all of Scanlon Oaks feeding into middle school 15. And so this just kind of cleaned that feeder up a little bit better and better utilized, balanced the utilization between Baines Middle School and middle school 15. So that does it for the feeder patterns. I just want to stress that there's a lot of emotion about this, but I also want you guys to take into account that these are changes that aren't going to happen overnight, and that there's going to be an implementation plan. And we're showing numbers that reflect immediate implementation just so that we can make sure that they work with our projections. But just remember that just because a feeder pattern is changing or a zone line is changing, depending on the implementation plan, your student may or may not be impacted. There's other considerations for siblings and those kind of things, and those are decisions that are being made during the implementation plan. And so just please keep that in mind and be mindful of it when you're providing your feedback. All right, so just a little bit more detail on these boundary change discussions. This is going to be that separate QR code out there. And we're going to have all these slides that you see up here on about a 30-second cycle on the projector screen out there in the cafeteria. And so you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback on these as well if you wish. And so what you can see here, this is our current elementary, or our current boundaries on the Travis kind of west side of the district. You can see currently at Oakland, we've got just a vast geographical area and a lot of growth that is currently assigned to Oakland. And we've got portions of Aliana, south of Airport, currently zoned to Oakland. We've got this Harvest Green area, which is starting to come online. And we've got, it comes all the way down here to 1464, Old Orchard. Some of the feedback that we saw was, hey, what's going on with, I think it's Shiloh Lakes here. That looks like it's some kind of special gerrymandered, somebody made a phone call and got that done. And I just want to assure you guys that's not the case. If you look at the current boundaries, Shiloh Lakes is currently assigned to Oyster Creek. And so what this is this is just a continuation of that Oyster Creek boundary. And so this isn't something that's artificially made. I think that one thing that we could do to make it look better on the maps is if we change this planning unit to incorporate the golf course so that it didn't look like this little kind of shark fin coming into Travis. And so that's something that we can look at moving forward. But again, what we've done here is we, based on feedback from scenario A, we asked a question about moving students twice, and it became evident that we didn't want to move students twice. If students are overcrowded in one school, we didn't want to move them into a new school to just have to move them back later. And so that's why we looked at this Barbara Jordan area. And so we have this kind of north of Aliana, Mission Sierra area that we left in Barbara Jordan. And so we're going to have some overutilization at Barbara Jordan, but the school district is in the process of acquiring additional land north of, I think it's Bissonnet up here, in that bush feeder pattern that would later relieve Barbara Jordan. And so our proposed 46 boundary, it's kind of difficult to see on the screen, but it's this dark blue here. And this light blue is a kind of tentative placeholder for 49, which is scheduled to open in 2017. And so what we'd have here is we'd have all of Aliana, and then coming down here to Old Orchard, all feeding into Elementary 46. And then in scenario B, we would have, they would split between Garcia and Bowie. North of Airport would go to Bowie, south of Airport would go to Garcia, and then they would all come back together and go to Travis. Now, I think one of the questions may be, well, how come they just don't all go to Bowie? And we looked at that. We looked at what happens if we send them all to Bowie, and with all this growth happening in Aliana South, that would very quickly overwhelm Bowie, and we'd be looking at Garcia low around 60%. And so it's that balance again of trying to best utilize the schools and maintain that feeder concept. All these students here, this is Fieldstone and Waterside. In our focus groups, we had representatives from both areas, and we asked, hey, who wants to go to Elementary 49? No one wanted to leave Oakland. And so when we looked at this and went through the numbers, we saw that we just can't keep Fieldstone and Waterside together at Oakland. It's almost 1,500 students once it's all built out. And so Elementary 46 would open next school year, right, Max? And we would have Elementary 49 opening in 2017. And there's also talk about possibly accelerating this to get this to open sooner. All these students would stay at Oakland. They would not go to 46. They would stay at Oakland until 49 opens. And so this would be the boundary for 46. And we know that this is going to continue to grow south of Airport and even north of Airport within Aliana. And we've also tasked the district with looking at additional sites in South Aliana because we just know that there's so much growth and there's going to be a need for more capacity in that area. Okay, Elementary 47. This is another very high growth area. And this is again kind of where we struggled with that balance of we don't want to open up a school that's over capacity. And so when we do the boundaries for this school, we looked first, the immediate need of overcrowding was at Commonwealth. And geographically where the school is located, we looked at the students that are closest to that geographical location. And when we started to look at this, we said, okay, we heard a lot of feedback from Creekstone Village that, hey, it's much closer to 47 than it is to Settlers Way. And so when we, I see your signs. Let me get through this, and then once we get out of the cafeteria, we can go through it in detail. And so what we started to do was we said, okay, well, what can we do to this boundary to get that area, get Creekstone Village and Brookside into 47? And so we started down the avenue of, okay, well, we've taken all of the growth area out of Commonwealth. So our first move was to look at Avalons at Riverstone. And so we looked at moving Avalons at Riverstone into, or leaving them at Commonwealth to reduce the number that 47 would open with. The issue that we've been having is that there's just a large number of students that are in this planning unit, which is Creekstone Village and Brookside, Brookstone. And so what we then looked at is, okay, well, what happens if we take this growth area, I believe it's planning unit 227B, which doesn't have any students in it currently, and put it into Commonwealth? What we looked at there is that is a scenario that may work, but the downstream effects of that are if we move them into Commonwealth, we already heard feedback from parts of the community that said that there's just too much growth and too many students in the lower grades in Telfair that they would overwhelm Clements once they get to high school aged. And that's something that we're looking at in our revised projections that are coming out in a couple weeks to see if that's really the case or if it's something that is sustainable. And so the thought is if we move these students and leave them at Commonwealth, they would then naturally, if we wanted to maintain that feeder, they would naturally flow up through Fort Settlement into Clements. And if that's the case, and everything that we've been hearing from the feedback is that when you zone things to Clements, they magically increase student yields and property values go up. And so the thought was, if we did that, are we just not doing the same thing that we did at Telfair? And so when we modeled that, we opened Elementary 47 under capacity. We could fit Creekstone Village into Elementary 47. But then, as we look forward in time, we have 900 students, 1,000 students at Commonwealth again, and we're in the same situation that we're in now. We're in the same situation that we are in now. And at that same time, because we've taken Creekstone Village out of Settlers Way, we have two overutilized schools here at Commonwealth and Elementary 47, and then we have two underutilized schools at Settlers Way and Austin Parkway. And so that's part of the challenge of this entire scenario, is that if we just move students around to get them into the schools that they desire to go to, then we're at that balance of having an imbalance in utilization and having a broken feeder. And so if that's something that you'd like us to look at, tell us, give us your feedback. Please use the, the survey instruments that we provide. Okay, Schiff, Goodman, and Burton into Heritage Rose. Do we have any Schiff people here today? Yes. A little bit, okay. Schiff is kind of in the same scenario that Oakland is in. There are just enough students living in this area to be a high school. And so, that's evident because we have, we have a lack of seats in this area, and that's something that's going to be remedied soon with Elementary 48 and Middle School 15. But we've got students coming from Schiff all the way up to First Colony. And so what we've looked at here is what are some changes that we could make immediately to relieve some of the enrollment at Schiff. And so some of the first things that we looked at is what happens if we take some of the area that is off of 6, and I believe this is Creekmont, and there's some apartments up here that are off of Sienna Parkway. We move them south into Heritage Rose, which is currently 50% utilized. That gives Schiff a little bit of breathing room to get that addition online to get the utilization at that school down. And that is something that could implement starting next year. And then in 2016, once the additions are online at Schiff, Sienna Crossing, and Scanlon Oaks, There's another area here that we could move from Schiff, some large areas here that we could move from Schiff into Sienna Crossing to better utilize, to really get Schiff down to size. If you look at just the vast geographical area that Schiff is now, it's very similar to Oakland, and this reduces it greatly, and it better balances utilization at all of the schools. The other piece of this scenario is we also have some overcrowding at Goodman and Burton. What we've looked at is we take everybody that is east of 521 and also move them south into Heritage Rows. And so what this does is this immediately relieves the overcrowding at those schools and then gets the utilization at Heritage Rows up. And one other important piece to this is that these students are already feeding into Baines, and so they're currently bouncing. They're going to elementary school north of 6. They're coming to middle school south of 6, and they're coming back to Hightower. And so with this change in combination with the feeder pattern scenario, they would come south, and they would stay south. They would go to Heritage Rows, Baines, and then to Ridge Point. So this is another kind of combo scenario, and this is something that resulted as out of the recommendations from the facility master plan last year. This is the current Walker Station boundary. The purple lines are the high school boundaries, and the kind of yellow-orange lines are the middle school boundaries. This is that Satartia area. And you can see currently we have, I think it's Broadstone at New Territory. These students are, I believe this is 99. They are west of 99. They come to Walker Station. They go to Satartia. And then they are the 5% of Walker Station that goes to Travis. And so in this scenario, what we've done is we've taken these apartments, taken them from Walker Station to Brazos Bend. And so that gets that feeder pattern cleaned up. And I believe at some point in the past, when this was kind of more of a growing community, Brazos Bend, they were here, but they had to be moved out because of the overcrowding of Brazos Bend. Now that that community is starting to turn over and age out, there's room again at Brazos Bend for those students. And what this also does is this offsets and makes room at Walker Station for that Telfair Exchange lofts. And so those Telfair Exchange lofts would then move into Walker Station. Like I talked about before, they would all go to Walker Station, and so we'd have a detached zone, but from a transportation standpoint, it's pretty simple because bus comes in, one stop, picks up all the kids, takes them directly to Walker Station. And they all go to Satartia, and they would all go to Austin. Colony Meadows and Lakeview to Colony Bend. This has had some discussion. The way that we had originally proposed this was we wanted to, take this triangle, which is currently in Lakeview, First Colony, and then Kempner, and we wanted to give them a consistent feeder pattern. And so in scenario A, and still in scenario B as it's recommended, we took this triangle and put it into Colony Meadows, Fort Settlement, and then into Clements. In order to make room for this, we've also taken the foundations at Austin Colony Apartments and moved them from Colony Meadows to Colony Bend. And this is another one of those facility master plan recommendations that we've been looking at. In the board meeting, there was some conversation about maybe tweaking this a little bit. And what happens if, we take the triangle to Colony Bend and then into First Colony where they already are today, and then into Clements. What we'd have to do is we looked at this, we could also move we could still move the apartments into Colony Bend, but it would be crowded, it would be at 100%. Or we could leave them at Colony Meadows. And so when we made this recommendation in the master plan, we didn't have this whole lens of the feeder alignment that we do now. And so that's something that we're going to look at. And what this may do is this may help that balance at Fort Settlement and reduce the numbers at Fort Settlement, making a scenario where we may have a Creekstone Village able to fit into Fort Settlement. And so that's something that we're looking at. And if it's something that you'd like us to continue to look at, please comment on that. It doesn't really help 47, but it does possibly open up room to keep Creekstone Village and Brookside at Fort Settlement. Now, what's just important to consider, and I really want let me finish. What I want to hammer on is that in that scenario, we may be overcrowded at Fort Settlement sooner because of all that projected growth from Riverstone. And so, again, that's one of those areas where we have to look at the balance of the utilization versus the feeder, because that's a scenario where we could have Fort Settlement at 100% or 110% and then have First Colony at 80. We're back here having these meetings again in a couple years. And so that's something to consider. Do you want something for right now, or do you want something that's more long term? Okay, that's what I've got. All the feeder maps are set up like we had at Scenario A. We've got those boards out there set up. There's QR codes that are taped up to those for the feeder scenarios. And so if you scan that QR code on your phone, you can take the survey. It's going to ask you what map are you looking at. Just click it yes, and you can fill out the survey on there. You can take as many as you want, go to all 12 of them, that's fine. Go home, fill it out again. The boundary maps, again, they're going to be on a projector screen out there on a 30-second cycle. The QR code should be there for those too. It's a separate survey. We've got a QR code for the feeders. We've got a QR code for the boundaries. All the materials will be posted on the school district website later this week. Be courteous to others. You guys have been great. Thank you for letting me get through this. And then we'll be out there to talk to you. I'm not going anywhere, so thank you so much. This is great.